Important races in San Antonio's history. In a campaign that started with 27, they are the final two. Two candidates who want to be San Antonio's next mayor. That may be one of the only things they agree on. Tonight, live from Trinity University, Gina Ortiz Jones and Rolando Pablos talk about the issues, their differences, and how they will face the challenges of a growing city. Our goal is to get to real-world answers about issues that matter to our everyday lives. Things the mayor actually deals with, not unrealistic goals. Tonight, two candidates with very different visions. One debate, 1 hour. The KSAT debate begins right now. Welcome to Trinity University, the Steerin Theater, and the KSAT Mayoral Debate. I'm Steve Spriester. I will be your host and your moderator for tonight's Mayoral Debate. And I want to say, is there a more fitting place than Trinity University to have this debate? An institute of higher learning where we hope to learn more about who will lead San Antonio into the future. I also want to recognize we do have a live audience here. I want to recognize a couple of groups right now. First off, the people that are with the League of Women Voters that are with us tonight. Thank you for being here. And I also want to thank those with the GI Forum of Bexar County who join us. To all of our veterans who are here in the audience and here at home, thank you for your service. And while we're talking about this audience and we're talking about the crowd, I love the enthusiasm. I love the yelling. I love the fact that you're all out here to take part of this process. But let's be respectful to the candidates and the answers tonight. Let's applaud at the beginning, let's applaud at the end, and let's listen in between. But you can applaud all you want right now. All right, I love it. I love it. All right, let's meet the panelists who are going to be asking the bulk of the questions tonight. First, Trinity sociology and anthropology professor and a sought-after expert on the inequities of San Antonio, Professor Christine Drennan. Next, my KSAT co-anchor at 5 and 6 and co-host of our election night live stream coverage, Miss Myra Arthur. And Calgard Distinguished Professor of Practice in Political Science at Trinity University, and the guy who texted me with an idea, hey, let's do a debate, Professor Juan Sepulveda. And I now want to introduce the candidates, Gina Ortiz Jones and Rolando Pablos. The rules tonight are very simple. 90 seconds to answer a question, 45-second rebuttal, and an additional 15-second rebuttal time at myself and the panelists' discretion. Not the candidates' discretion, I'm sorry, but we're going to make that decision. I also have a couple of disclaimers we've got to read here. Trinity University affirms freedom of expression. Views expressed by speakers and participants before, during, and after speaking engagements do not represent or reflect the views of the university. Also, the views and opinions expressed in this debate are those of the individual candidates and do not reflect the views of KSAT 12. What do you say? Let's get started. One more round of applause and then, All right, I think it's appropriate at a learning institution that we're going to start with a little homework here. We'd like to start off the night with a question about the budget. Not more than $1 billion, but we're going to say the budget is $101 bills. Imagine that is the city budget. Take a look at how the city spends its money now. 62% on public safety, 8% on streets and infrastructure, 4% on parks and recreation. That means there's roughly $26 for other items. Myra.
public safety, streets and infrastructure, parks and recreation. Those are the things that the city is responsible for funding. Roughly a quarter of that budget, that 26% you see on this graph, is much more discretionary. How would you spend that quarter of the city's money to reach your goals for the city? Tell us how you would divide that 26 out of $100. We flipped a coin to see who would go first. Ms. Ortiz Jones, you get your first response.
Great. Well, thank you. My thanks to the host, and thank you all for joining us today. When we think about our budget is a moral document, right? I mean, it's important that we are thinking, certainly in the short term, as given the changing fiscal environment that many of our community members are dealing with. So there is, what we would like to do in our community. I think it's also important, though. I'm here with many veterans, and I've met many veterans, unfortunately, that are impacted already by some of the cuts that we're seeing. They may be a veteran that worked at the VA that is now fired, that is now looking for their next opportunity, as well as, potentially some of those federal civil servants in our community that are also thinking about their next steps. I think it's really important when we think about making investments in our community, we are understanding not only what we'd like to do today, but as we all know, there's going to be a big gap in 2027. And so what I'd like to do is really sit down with the city staff and understand how can we close that gap, how can we accomplish no-fail missions, make sure we're funding our first responders, which includes fire and EMS, to make sure they can meet those missions. Let's make sure we're minimizing any long-term impacts to our most vulnerable, for example, at our senior centers. And let's, as a result of making sure that we balance the budget, also ensure we're not incurring any long-term risks as associated with that. So again, we've got to look at this in the aggregate, as we're also looking at what we might be thinking about with a 2027 bond. So lots of moving pieces. That's how I would approach going into these budget discussions, though.
That's how you would spend those $26.
Well, again, we've got to look at the information before us. Where are there great needs in our community in light of, again, what is happening at the federal level, what is happening at the state level, certainly, again, the rising costs, but also let's look at who's most impacted by these things. That's, I think, what is most important. When we look at streets and infrastructure, we know this 8% is not equal throughout our community. Right? So let's look at who would be most impacted by some of the cuts that are not within the city's control, and let's understand how we can work with the city, the state, and federal partners to best address those needs. It's about meeting people's needs, not necessarily making sure we've got the perfect percentage of the budget toward that. We've got to focus on meeting needs. That's how I think we approach the budget.
Mr. Pablo.
Well, I would start by looking at preferences versus priorities. What are our priorities? And right now, I believe that public safety is a top priority. And I've already said we're not only not going to cut it, but I want to be able to add to that budget. We're short-staffed. Police and fire are stretched thin. We have a situation with crime. And so I think that public safety needs to be a top priority. And so I've already said that. The other thing is looking at how do we take care of our most vulnerable communities? Our children with education, our seniors, our veterans. We have to make sure that we look at those first. We have to prioritize. Obviously, health and human services is a top priority. Poverty eradication, I would put money into economic development. I think it's very important that we do that.
So now that you have weighed in on your budget priorities with our hypothetical $26, it's time for some reality. The city is projecting a $31 million deficit next year, and a potentially $148 million deficit the following year. So as mayor, where would you make cuts? Mr. Pablo.
Well, like I said, I wouldn't cut anything related to public safety. What I'd like to do is I'd like to do a third-party audit. I want to see where our money's being spent today. I want to be able to protect our taxpayers. I want to make sure that taxpayer money is spent wisely. So I will work with staff to identify those areas that we can deprioritize and shift the money into these priorities that I'm talking about. Now, I'll also work to improve the top line. We also have to talk about tax revenue without overtaxing our citizens. So I'd like to be able to expand our tax base, bring new business here that will pay taxes so that we can have additional revenue, because we can't pay for any of this stuff if we don't have the revenue. So I would also look to improve the revenue without raising taxes on anyone.
You mentioned an audit, finding more information about how the city spends its money now. Is there a way the city is spending money now that you know of that you would propose cutting?
Well, there's several examples. I think that plans to add bike lanes when we have public safety needs would be an example of how we need to shift those priorities. I don't have anything against bike lanes, but proposing to spend $8 billion on bike lanes just doesn't seem like an appropriate way to use our money.
Ms. Ortiz-Jones, to you, where would you make cuts?
Well, I think it's really important, as I also shared, that we are looking at the data to understand how any proposed cuts would impact the most vulnerable. I spent time at the Walker Ranch Senior Center on the far north side. Let me just say that is also a much different senior center than the one on W.W. White, by the way, in District 2. So I think it's important, though, when I sat with those folks during January, it was also where they were celebrating their birthdays. And 200 some odd folks enjoyed lunch that day. And that all of those meals, the leadership team said, were gone in 15 minutes. So it's important that we are protecting those resources, those folks that are on fixed income, those folks that are frankly most vulnerable with any discussion of threats to Social Security, as many of those folks are actually also raising the kids themselves again. So when we look at any changes here, I think it's important that we, again, are cognizant, we have the data about who would be most impacted and how we can minimize those impacts moving forward.
Again, is there an area that you know of right now where you would suggest the city begins cutting in order to meet the needs proposed by this deficit?
I think one of the areas, many of us read about the $1.4 million, for example, that the city subsidized for that direct flight to Frankfurt. Pet projects like that, that flight, was no longer operating just 6 months later. And so I think going through the budget with a fine-tooth comb to understand where are some of these other investments where the data doesn't necessarily show this is the best use of resources. I think, frankly, many folks who were not lucky enough to get tickets to the Final Four were also questioning city resources that were used to send city council members to go to that game with not a clear benefit for what that meant for the constituents. So I think things like that, there are probably little pockets of money we can make sure that we are pulling back in light of some of the other alternatives that we may have to look at. But again, the seniors, kids are most vulnerable. I will protect those resources.
With the next question, let's go to Professor Juan Sepulveda.
Thanks, Steve. So even though San Antonio it's a council manager form of government, a weak mayor form of government, one powerful tool that you will have as mayor is the bully pulpit. So how would you use the mayor's bully pulpit to advocate for San Antonio? Should the mayor of San Antonio weigh in on state and national issues like school vouchers or abortion or immigration, or international issues like the war in Gaza? And how would you choose your battles? We'll start with Ms. Ortiz-Jones.
Yeah, well, let me express my thanks to my fellow veterans in the audience. We are Military City USA, proudly. And I'm proud to call myself an Air Force veteran, Iraq War veteran. And then, given my most recent service as the Undersecretary of the Air Force, I'm uniquely familiar with the key role that San Antonio plays in our national security. So I think it's really important that we think about the long term. What does Military City USA look like in 2040, 2050? Right? As well as being very clear about the ways, again, in cuts to the VA are impacting not only the veterans that are getting fired as a result of those cuts, but also the decrease in services. I get my own care at Audie Murphy. Sometimes the clinic on 151, they have better parking. But it's important that we are speaking up when those cuts uniquely impact us. There aren't many other communities that have 16% of their population either active duty or veteran, right? So it's important we speak up on those things. I think it's also really important we are investing in smart, healthy kids. The number one reason why people serve in the military is because they know somebody who has served. That makes communities like ours very important to national security. So if we're not producing enough smart, healthy kids, that's in fact a national security issue. But I would argue if you're not smart enough or academically prepared enough or healthy enough to serve in the military, you might not be ready for the opportunities in our own community. So that is an issue in particular that I would speak out on, again, because it impacts our veterans so immediately.
Mr. Pablo.
I believe the job of mayor is to go and represent San Antonio and sell San Antonio. So I would use that bully pulpit to bring in investment to this community. We are lacking serious investment in this community, companies that will come and create jobs here. So I would go out into the world, and I've done it before, bring companies here. We have to convince them first to come and invest in this community. So my plan would be to go identify the companies that would best be a fit for San Antonio and make sure that they come visit, make sure they understand the reality of this beautiful community, understand the reality of our workforce, our great workforce, and all the great things that are happening here so that we can bring those jobs that are so sorely needed. We have depressed wages in this community. We have to make sure that we do a good job in selling San Antonio.
Great. Quick follow-up?
Sure.
So quick follow-up for both of you. I know you guys started this conversation the other day with the chamber and this essay report. And so what I wanted to ask you, because I know there was that question of, they gave very specifics for both of you, for Ms. Ortiz-Jones, this notion of if the adversarial approach potentially that they said some voters may feel like goes too far in terms of how you use the bully pit on talking about different issues. So I'd love to have you here give an example of something where you would say, I wouldn't talk about it, or I don't think the mayor should weigh in on the war in Gaza or whatever it is. And for Mr. Pablo, it's kind of the opposite. They were kind of asking, would you be able to stand up for the city of San Antonio? So I'd love to hear an issue where there's maybe something you were in disagreement with the state or at the national level where you say that shouldn't be right and you would be willing to stand up and fight for those. Let's start with Ms. Ortiz.
Let's do 45 seconds for this question for each candidate.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, my mom taught me that if you don't have anything to say, then don't say anything. So I can't think of a topic in which I would spend time talking about it if I didn't think it was worth speaking about. I think it's important when we talk about speaking about facts, speaking about numbers, speaking about the impacts of people's decisions on people's lives, especially those that can be quantified. That's not adversarial. That is speaking truth to power. That is making sure that our community is well represented. I've said I want to be a mayor for all, and that requires speaking truth to power when the most vulnerable are suffering under these poor decisions.
I would focus on education because we have this issue with our vouchers that's going on in Austin right now. Look, I'm all in favor of parental choice. I'm all in favor of competition. Competition is good for the consumer. It forces the person producing the service to do better, but not at the risk of defunding our police, our schools. We can't be doing that. We have to make sure that we have the proper funding. My wife is a public school teacher, so I want to make sure we work towards that.
Thank you.
With the next question, Professor Christine Drennan.
Thank you. There is no place like home. We love this city, but we know you're both world travelers. You've seen the rest of the world, you've seen the rest of the country. And we'd like you to pick another city or cities anywhere in the world as examples of what you would like to see and what you think about, or places that San Antonio can learn from and even emulate. I believe we're starting with Mr. Pablos.
I believe that Miami has done an excellent job at being the hub for Latin America. There's no reason why we can't be the next Miami. We have everything that it takes, especially our geography. There's a reason why the military chose San Antonio, because we are perfectly situated geographically. We're close to Mexico, we're close to the ocean, we're close to our state capital. I see San Antonio becoming that hub, and I believe that we can get there. We can be that global city, just like Miami, a Hispanic city. We just have to be able to have the leadership at the international level to be able to reach across borders. And I have that experience. As Secretary of State, I travel the world promoting Texas, bringing investment here. And look, we have everything that it takes to get there, and I'll make sure that we promote it that way.
It was a 4-year Air Force ROTC scholarship that took me from John Jay High School to Boston University. So Boston has a very special place in my heart. And I'm when I think of Boston, I think of their world-class public education system. That has been critical to their economy. As many know, they're a hub for many of the country, frankly, the world's best educational institutions, and many of them come from that exact city. Their mayor has also been quite thoughtful in making sure that housing affordability is a priority, as well as addressing some of the climate change related and the need to invest in adaptation, resilience, and mitigation. So I think they're doing all of the above in light of the threats and opportunities before them.
Thank you.
All right, we have hit Miami, Boston, vouchers, and the budget. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with the KSAT 12 debate. From Trinity University's Steerin Theater, I'm Steve Spriester. I want to compliment the audience for how gracious and respectful they have been so far. Thank you very much to everyone in the audience. I also forgot to introduce a very important man. Tony Castro is our timekeeper tonight, and he's right there off to the side. So with our next question, I believe we go back to Professor Christine Drennan.
There are giant looming questions about Project Marble. The plan to create a new downtown entertainment district, which includes a new Spurs stadium. We know we don't have all the data, especially on how taxpayer dollars will be used. We also agree that we don't want to lose the Spurs. But people wonder, who is downtown for anymore? Is it for tourists? Is it for business? Or is it for locals? Please rank these three. And Ms. Ortiz-Jones, I believe we start with you.
Business, tourists, and locals are on the same level for me. Okay, it's really important, to your point, that we do everything we can to fight to keep our Spurs and everything possible to also make sure that San Antonio gets a good deal. I've been very clear. I think we're actually premature in talking about some of the how much the city needs to pony up when there hasn't been nearly enough discussion of how the city is ultimately going to benefit. I've been very clear. We need answers to three questions: how much is it going to cost, who's going to pay, and how is the city going to benefit? And then we can talk about the city's portion of that. My opponent, I know, feels differently about this. San Antonio Express News asked, and he said he thinks up to 50% of city funding should go toward paying for the new Spurs Arena. When we don't have all of this information, as you rightly point out, we haven't actually talked about the community benefit agreements yet. I think it's really premature. So I think it's important that folks understand why we are doing this in this way and in this fashion. And certainly, as anybody that's done any business, you know you don't negotiate against yourself, right? You've got to make sure you've got all the data before you talk about using city resources, as we've just described, giving all of the inequities in our community. I think it's possible we could get to a deal. This generational investment could help us address our generational inequities, but we should not be talking about levels of city funding absent sufficient discussion of how the city is going to benefit.
But going further, I want to interject here. The question was rank those three.
Yeah.
Business, tourists, locals.
Yeah.
Can you rank those three?
Steve, rank how much you love your kids. Who do you love more, right? All of those are important. And I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can prioritize bringing businesses there. We can prioritize the tourist experience. We can also make sure that downtown isn't just a bunch of luxury condos and micro units, right? We can do all of these at the same time.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Mr. Pablo and then follow up if you don't mind.
Here's how I rank it: jobs, jobs, jobs. We have to make sure that we have jobs for our locals. This is a jobs creation program. This is an economic development program. It could be a game changer. And just like we invest taxpayer money in training our people, I think we should also invest taxpayer money in creating jobs, good paying jobs. Downtown is a great place for tourists, for locals, and for business. We have to make sure that we create an environment for all three. You're right, I don't want to lose the Spurs. And they could go somewhere else, just like it happened in Seattle. They went to Oklahoma City. But that doesn't mean that our taxpayers are going to lose out. So we just have to understand what are the consequences of not investing in a Project Marble. Are we going to lose out on conventions? We are a tourist destination. We're a tourism city. So we have to make sure that we keep that in mind before we go and saying that we will not spend any tax money on there. And if we do, I will want to make sure that the taxpayers get the return on their investment and that all 10 districts benefit from it. And I have a plan for that.
By the way, all three of my daughters have now texted me asking who I rank 1, 2, and 3. Christine, go ahead.
Just really briefly, and Ms. Ortiz-Jones, you said that all are the same, and that's admirable, but the neighborhoods don't see it this way. Mm-hmm. Right, a lot of the neighborhoods, look at this potential investment downtown and say, well, I've still got packs of dogs wandering in the streets. Mm-hmm. So again, admirable to see them as equivalent, but the neighborhoods don't. How do we get there?
Well, I think we negotiate hard and we don't negotiate against ourselves. The best way to get the highest wage jobs is not to already say, hey, we're going to pay for 50% of the new arena. You've got to look at what are the specifics, make sure we've got sufficient number of jobs at a sufficient wage for a sufficient amount of time moving forward. I've been very clear, is it possible, and I think we need to be bold, let's be bold. Why can't we think of the way in which investing in Project Marvel can ultimately help us fully fund our pre-K for SA program in our community? Why can't we think in that way? That's how I would be pushing, not signing us up for 50% to pay for this new arena, absent any information about actual return on the investment.
And quickly, with Mr. Pablo's jobs, agreed, but these are jobs in the tourist sector. And we know that historically, they don't pay a living wage. So is this the kind of jobs that we should be prioritizing?
Well, look, I disagree. I think jobs that are born out of tourism eventually lead into management positions. You create entrepreneurship. So I don't buy into that. I'll tell you right now, our city needs to continue to invest in jobs for everyone and jobs that are going to pay well. Now, this issue about the neighborhoods, my plan is to invest in every single one of the districts equal amounts of money that are coming out of the revenue of this project. We have to take that revenue, put it into a fund that is then segregated for infrastructure and public safety for every district.
May I?
I want to clarify one thing before we take our next break. And Ms. Ortiz-Jones said that you are committed to giving up to 50% of the total cost out of taxpayers' dollars. Is that accurate?
Look, here's the thing is, when we went to the Express News editorial board meeting, they put a questionnaire in front of us and asked us to fill it out immediately. Ms. Jones didn't do that. She didn't fill it out. I filled it out because what I wanted to do is I wanted to create an environment where we have the private sector and business sector and public sector cooperating. We have to make sure that we go out into the world and look at best practices. And best practices dictate that you have to have a public-private partnership. And what a better way to start than right in the middle? That was my reasoning, not that I was going to sell out the taxpayers she's been claiming.
Can I answer that? I didn't answer that questionnaire, and I pushed back when they put that survey in front of me and frankly said, well, everyone else answered it. I don't care what everyone else did. I'm not signing our city up for something that we don't have nearly sufficient information for. A best practice, and what is the best practice when you're signing your city up to pay for 50% of a new Spurs arena and you don't have any information about what is the 50%? Is it 1 billion? Is it 2 billion? How does the community benefit? Do we have an agreement about how long the Spurs are going to stay in our community? Do we have any of that? No, but Rolando said, okay, let's just fill out this thing. Absolutely not. That is not the mayor I would be. If you want somebody to sell you out, vote for Rolando.
Rolando, I'll give you 15 seconds to rebut that.
Look, personal attacks and attacks on my integrity and my reputation aren't going to work. I've been in this community for way too long. People understand that I'm in this to protect this community. And so to say that I'm going to sell out the taxpayers is simply ridiculous.
We're going to take a break. We'll be right back with the Trinity debate. Welcome back to the Trinity University Steer-In Theater and our KSAT mayoral debate. With the next question, Professor Juan Sepulveda.
Thanks, Steve. With our council manager form of government, as mayor, you have only one vote on the city council. You need at least half of the city council, 5 more votes to do anything. So please describe for the voters a specific time in your professional, political, or community experience when you brought people together around a divisive issue, when they were not all on board, when they were not on the same page, and you were able to get them to come together to get something done. Please describe the issue, the situation. What did you do? What was your approach? How did you overcome the opposition to what you were trying to get done? And what did you achieve? We'll start with Mr. Pablo.
Absolutely. I have worked my entire career in building coalitions, bringing people together, ensuring that people get along, but also providing the leadership that's required to be able to move the issues forward. I'll tell you, as Secretary of State, I realized that there's a law that all school principals must get their students registered to vote. And when I stepped in, I realized that out of 2,000 Texas high schools, only 100 principals were abiding by that law. So I took it upon myself to bring these principals together to ensure that they were following the rules, following the law, to get their students registered. And once I stepped off of being Secretary of State, we had about 1,200 schools participating. And it wasn't easy because we had to round them up. We had to actually chase them to make sure that they did that. And I hope that they continue to do that because that was one of the most important things I did as Secretary of State, is to get our kids registered to vote.
How did you get it done? What did you do?
So one of the pushbacks was that it was expensive to print out the forms, and so we took away every reason that the principals had, whether it was because of staffing or whatever it was, and we put our staff ready to be able to cooperate and work with them all, and it worked.
Ms. Ortiz-Jones.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'm most proud of as the Undersecretary of the Air Force was really tackling one of the challenges that is a stain on, unfortunately, the department, which is sexual assault, sexual harassment. Lots of data showed that our current approach was failing our survivors. They were having to go to too many locations to retell their story, and as a result of that, we weren't collecting all the information to truly understand what had happened, and 2, how could we have prevented it? And most importantly, those survivors did not feel like the process was there to serve them. They thought the process was more there to serve and protect the service member. As importantly, though, you had very senior folks thinking it was really working well, but the people who had to use this service did not think it was working well at all, right? So what I did is I took the recommendations from experts that said, hey, if we consolidated these things, one person the survivor only has to tell their story once, not 17 times, right? We can better collect the data, the providers can better coordinate, and we can understand, did this start with grooming? Does this include financial abuse? And certainly there were folks that pushed back on that, and I said, well, let's do a pilot. All right, let's do a pilot at a couple of bases. Based on those service providers' feedback, we'll look at what the data shows us. The data showed us after a 6-month pilot that was overwhelmingly the best way to do that. We also saw an increase in the rate of people reporting, in part because the process was better. So that included listening to stakeholders, understanding we could do better, and then putting a process in place to bring people along.
Thank you.
With the next question, Professor Christine Drennan.
Thank you. I don't remember who starts.
I think Gina Ortiz-Jones starts.
Thank you. We live in a city where some neighborhoods don't have basics, drainage, sidewalks, or proper lighting. Should the city evenly distribute its resources across all neighborhoods, or focus on areas depending on where it's needed most, those neighborhoods most in need? And basically, is an equity budget the answer?
I think we've got to look at where those are suffering the most and where our return on investment would be the highest. And I would argue that is in our communities that unfortunately have been underserved for too long. Because for us to try to do a peanut butter spread now doesn't recognize the many, many years that they were already underinvested in, correct? And when we look at also these areas, we can think about how some of these investments could actually help us address some of our other outcomes that we're concerned by. When I talked to the leaders of SAISD, I asked them, hey, all these schools closing down, how could we have helped the city? How could the city have helped? They said affordable housing. Right? That is a way in which you keep people in communities. That's also not only good for the families, it's also good for the teachers that are in that area, and helps, again, to prevent further schools from closing. So these solutions, I think, aren't just about the one thing before us, but really understanding the second and third order effects of those things in other areas that we're also concerned by. I think it's really important when we think about infrastructure as well. Infrastructure can help us with our public safety concerns, lighting, sidewalks, shade, et cetera. These are the kinds of things that we should be looking at, because the reality is your life expectancy on the south side is double digits lower than it is on the north side. So we have to look at this in terms of how do we move forward together.
Quick follow-up?
Sure.
Agreed. But how do you sell that idea to those neighborhoods that may not benefit from that immediately?
Well, you know, a perfect example of this, I just actually went to go visit April Chang and her family. They've got the Mitchell Landing at that new park. It's an accessible park on the north side. It's a beautiful park. It is the nicest park I've been to in an entire city. And we agree, and she agreed, this is not something that should only be on the north side. This is a very nice park. This should be the standard. Every community should have a park like that that is accessible for folks with kids with special needs, has adequate shade, et cetera. So those are, I mean, when we see that it looks well in one part of town, why would we not try to advocate for those same resources? I think we can have a discussion about, you know, how do we move forward together and ensure that everybody can benefit from these types of investments that are good for not only the individual, but also for the families.
Mr. Pablo.
I believe we're a balkanized city. We have 10 districts that are pitted against each other. It's us versus them, and that's been our situation for a long time. I would prioritize the most neglected parts of town. I think it's time that we go to those parts of town and actually invest the funds that are needed so that we can at least get those parts to catch up to other parts of town. You know, I've been to some of these places. It'll break your heart, and it's hard to believe that you're even in San Antonio in some of these places. It's not fair, and so we have to make sure that we go to those places, understand what is needed, and shift funds to those places, because we have to do it once and for all. We've been an impoverished city for way too long. I've talked about our poverty issue, and it's time that we start looking at how to eradicate poverty, and that is a reflection of the poverty that we have here.
Quick.
Sure.
Mayor Nuremberg did try, put in place what he very proudly called the equity budget. But it never got beyond a pilot project. And then hit some stumbles with COVID and just changes and rapid growth and changes in priority. How do we move that from being just a pilot project that had to do with a couple of streets and bring it to scale?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think this starts with looking at the results. Part of this, for example, we've got the bonds are always an opportunity to make these smart investments. I think it's important in the upcoming bond that we take a look at how we can make equitable investments in our infrastructure, but also make sure that we're spending that money faster. We're still not 90% complete with the bond money from 2017. So I think it's important that we look at the rate of return of our investments already, as well as be bold in things like what I want to do, not just talk about poverty, but okay, how are we going to address it? Well, first 100 days, I want to work with the city staff. Hey, show me how many kids, how much talent are we leaving on the table as a result of not fully funding pre-K in our community, right? Pre-K for SA, and then show me the bill. And this is where we can have an opportunity to engage with the community to say, hey, this is the bill. These are also, though, the costs of not investing in our young kids. I would argue if we had more pre-K for SA, we wouldn't need so much ready to work program. Right? And we can't tell Harlandale ISD to do, I can't tell Northside ISD what to do. But as a community, if we are serious about investing and addressing poverty, then we have to invest in what lots of literature shows is the best investment, which is always smart, healthy kids. And that's what I would work on. That's one of the things I would work on.
But we're talking about streets, sidewalks, drainage, curbs, just the basic, what people would consider the basics. And this is not something new. Mayor Henry Cisneros talked about this very issue, about the fact that there are neighborhoods, we've seen them in my neighborhood, if you go to South San, there are neighborhoods that don't have these basics. And I think that's the bigger question I'll ask you, Mr. Pablos.
How do we fix that?
Well, I think the first place to start is not call it an equity budget. I think that automatically starts to create division. I would call it a reality budget. We have to look at the reality of things. That's first and foremost. Now, I don't know the details of Mayor Ron's plan, but what I would do is I'd start bringing in our state and federal governments into this, making sure that we fight for that money that other cities are taking. Because you know what? Other cities in Texas are in Austin right now taking money that really could be coming to us, and the same thing at the federal level. So I would work to do that and make sure that we get the proper funding in addition to the funding that we're generating through our tax revenue.
Ms. Ortiz-Jones, if we're just talking about streets, sidewalks, drainage, curbs, what people would consider the basics of the city, there are parts of this town that say the city is failing them when it comes to that.
Yeah, oh, I know. And this is why I have not signed us up for 50% to pay for 50% of the Spurs new arena. Because when people look at a map and they say, oh, cool land bridge, my neighborhood doesn't have drainage, right? How are you going to address that? So again, helping people see how they're going to benefit from these things is important. We can look at a map and we can figure out, okay, we said we would do this project by this time. What is the state of that? Also, as we're looking and anticipating where we're going to see additional growth, also being smart with that. But I think it is important that we look at areas that have said they would be getting these projects, still do not have them, and how quickly can we work with a diversity of vendors to make sure that we're addressing those needs. I mean, that's just kind of basic accountability.
Sure. 15 seconds.
So we've looked at Gina's 100-day plan. And look, Gina's 100-day plan is a plan to make a plan. There's really nothing there. There's no policy prescriptions. There are no solutions in there. It's a bureaucratic plan to make a plan.
Now I'll give you 15 seconds, Ms. Ortiz-Jones.
Well, I mean, look, Rolando's plan is to do whatever Greg Abbott tells him to do. And we have seen this.
Respectful, please.
We've seen this in the questionnaires, okay? We've seen this in the questionnaires. San Antonio Express News asked him, hey, do you agree with the way in which the state has tried to curb local control? He said, yes, I agree. Cops Metro, a bunch of church leaders, when they asked him this question, he said, no, I oppose that. So if you cannot answer this very basic question about to whom you understand you are accountable, you are not fit for this job.
And with that, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the KSAT 12 mayoral debate live from Trinity University with our next question, my KSAT co-anchor, Myra Arthur.
Thank you, Steve. I want to give a shout out to the GI Forum, many members of which are in our audience tonight. They were the inspiration for our next topic. Homelessness is not an issue concentrated in downtown San Antonio. People experiencing homelessness are living on the streets of all parts of this city. While San Antonians have voiced a desire for solutions, some people don't want homeless resources or outreach in their neighborhoods. How do you balance that? Mr. Pablos.
So you heard me mention my concern about poverty. And poverty is a root condition that drives a lot of the problems we have, especially homelessness. Homelessness is an extreme form of poverty. And what we're seeing today is we're seeing homeless not only in downtown anymore, but they're going into our neighborhoods. So we have to make sure that we provide them the care that they need and that they want. And that's first and foremost. We lost 200 psychiatric beds downtown San Antonio when the Knicks closed down. But we have great shelters that we have to continue to fund. And we also have to focus on prevention, homelessness prevention. Homelessness is not just about drug addiction or mental health. Anyone can become homeless, with any unfortunate situation, particularly victims of domestic violence. We have a situation where victims of domestic violence find themselves homeless quickly, overnight. So we have to focus on the issues that are driving homelessness, but we also have to be able to work with our police to make sure that these individuals that are out there are not being, attacked by drug dealers or approached by human traffickers. There are other conditions that are affecting them, so we cannot have these encampments out there because we're basically allowing them to be exposed to the environment that sometimes does not favor them.
Before I get to a follow-up, Ms. Ortiz-Jones, I'm going to give you a chance to respond.
Yeah. It breaks my heart when I hear about my fellow veterans going unserved when it comes to housing, but also when it comes to, insufficient access to mental health resources. I think it's really important when we think about homelessness, we do focus on some things that could help the immediate need. The fentanyl crisis, unfortunately, is very real and impacting all throughout our community and contributes, I think, to some of the challenges we have with the unhoused, as well as with the mental health. We don't have nearly enough mental health resources, and particularly beds, to address that. That's an opportunity for the 2027 bond. I think in the immediate, though, more permanent supportive housing, I think, is really important. I think especially in a fiscal environment where decreases fiscal environment where economic resources are going to be much slower to come to us, we strengthen our partnership with organizations like Catholic Charities, with some of those that are really doing important work in this space, and have a path, a process that enables people to not only help address, what caused them to be homeless, but also puts them on a path to reentering in our community and our economy as contributing citizens.
You both have talked about helping the people at the root of this issue. Homelessness is a people problem. Services are available. The city is making an effort to connect people out on the street with those services. But part of the question was also about messaging. How do you reach neighbors who don't want that? They don't want that outreach. They don't want a shelter in their backyard, yet they want a solution to the problem. What would your message be, Mr. Pablo?
So I've volunteered in this community for many, many years, unlike Gina. I've been part of this community. I volunteered. I've been part of the Mayor's Homelessness Task Force, and I've worked with Haven for Hope for over 15 years. And it's a tough message to make because a lot of people simply don't want the help. And you can work with them, but a lot of times they turn it away. So the solution, I believe, is in putting more resources into individuals that will take care of them, even in spite of what their conditions are, to take that care. A lot of them want to sleep under the stars. So you have to make those accommodations for them. So you have to customize the solutions for them, especially for those that refuse to be institutionalized or be put in an institution that limits them. They feel like they're being confined and they don't like that. So you have to provide customized solutions.
Ms. Ortiz-Jones.
Yeah, well, before we answer that question, San Antonio is military city USA. I'm in a room full with my fellow veterans. I refuse to be attacked by Rolando Pablos for serving my country. Somebody had to go to Iraq, Rolando. Sorry we couldn't hang out all those years, okay? I think it's really important when we're thinking about these community resources. Yes, we have to take input from throughout the community. But this is, as the question asked earlier, is how do you work with the rest of the council? This is where it's not just the mayor's job to carry that message. It's the entire city staff and city council's responsibility to say, hey, this is what's good for San Antonio. This is what it's going to look like in District 2. This is what it looks like in District 3. This is what it looks like in District 10. And we have a community, a city message, a city plan that sees how everybody is contributing to address this problem that we all know is really important.
I have plenty more to ask, but we have a producer in our ear. Do we have to
Yes, we do. We're going to take a break. We're going to take our final break, and then we'll be right back. And we're getting towards the end here. And again, I want to commend the audience for being so respectful and hanging in with us. You're going to get your time to applaud at the end, I promise. I also want to thank our audience at home. And right now, I want to kind of turn the tables on the candidates. And I will start with you first, Gina Ortiz-Jones. You get one question for Rolando Pablos.
Okay.
One. And it goes now.
Okay. Why were you willing, when Texas AARP told you not to vote to raise the electricity cap from 3,000 to 9,000? They said, don't do that because you don't know how it's going to impact people. You voted anyways. As a result of that, during the storm, we all read these stories. A 67-year-old Army veteran got a $16,000 utility bill because you voted to increase that. Texas AARP told you not to do that, and you still did it. Why did you do that?
So Gina keeps bringing this issue up. So first and foremost, I served on the Public Utility Commission in 2011. The storm happened 10 years later. So let's be very clear about that. The other thing we need to understand is that whenever the state requires electricity generation, you have to make that generation attractive to generators. And if it's not attractive to them, they're not going to generate electricity. So it was a decision to make sure that we had ample electricity for our consumers.
All right, Mr. Pablos, it's your turn to ask a question of Gina Ortiz-Jones.
So, Gina, I'd like to know why, when you were at the Air Force as undersecretary, you committed to 4 years, and yet you only served for 18 months, and you left very quickly. And also, why was it that under that same command, the Air Force failed its financial audits repeatedly? Recruitment was at an all-time low. Retention was at an all-time low. And most troubling, readiness was at an all-time low. Please tell us why.
I'm very proud of my time as the Undersecretary of the Air Force, proud to have led our men and women faithfully. It was the right time for me to step aside based on the ways in which I had contributed, as well as anyone that knows the political appointee timeline. If you are not intending to stay for all 4 years, then you leave after the midterms. I know this is super wonky, but that allows the administration to identify who their next person would be. And frankly, I had worked very hard, and you can read about many of the things that I did. One of the things I was actually most proud of is working to bring back the fact that folks at basic training could get their citizenship when they went through Lackland Air Force Base. I pushed to bring that back. Recruiting, actually many of the programs that I worked on enabled us to go after certain communities that traditionally we had not advertised to or not talked about military service to. So I'm proud of the ways in which we will look to expand what serving in the Department of the Air Force could mean for them.
All right, I know I promised you a minute for closing. We're running out of time though. So I'm going to simply give you each 15 seconds. Somebody's at home watching. They're undecided. Why, first of all, should they vote for Rolando Pablos?
Experience matters. Being mayor requires experience, integrity. It requires qualifications and also the relationships needed to be able to bring that prosperity home.
Gina Ortiz-Jones.
I'm proud of my record of public service, helping to uplift people, serve to their full potential. One thing we didn't talk about tonight is when, as Secretary of State, Rolando Pablos was sued by several civil rights groups because he was willing to share personal voter information that made those folks susceptible to voter intimidation. That is his record of public service. We're
out of time. I apologize to both candidates for not giving you the full minute. I want to say thank you to the audience. Thank you to everybody here. Early voting starts on June 27th. Election Day is on June 7th. You can vote even if you did not vote in the early election. For everybody here and everyone at home, thank you for joining us. We'll see you on the Night Beat tonight at 10. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, candidates. Our live stream is right after this on KSAT Plus. Welcome to Trinity University, the Steerin Theater, and the KSAT mayoral debate.
The city is projecting a $31 million deficit next year and a potentially $148 million deficit the following year. So as mayor, where would you make cuts?
I think that plans to add bike lanes when we have public safety needs would be an example of how we need to shift those priorities. I don't have anything against bike lanes, but proposing to spend $8 billion on bike lanes just doesn't seem like an appropriate way to use our money.
I think one of the areas, many of us read about the $1.4 million, for example, that the city subsidized for that direct flight to Frankfurt. Pet projects like that, that flight, was no longer operating just 6 months later. And so I think going through the budget with a fine-tooth comb to understand where are some of these other investments where the data doesn't necessarily show this is the best use of resources.
One powerful tool that you will have as mayor is the bully pulpit. So how would you use the mayor's bully pulpit to advocate for San Antonio? Should the mayor of San Antonio weigh in on state and national issues like school vouchers or abortion or immigration, or international issues like the war in Gaza? And how would you choose your battles? We'll start with Ms. Ortiz-Jones.
I'm uniquely familiar with the key role that San Antonio plays in our national security. So I think it's really important that we think about the long term. What does Military City USA look like in 2040, 2050, right? As well as being very clear about the ways, again, in cuts to the VA are impacting not only the veterans that are getting fired as a result of those cuts, but also the decrease in services.
I would focus on education because we have this issue with our vouchers that's going on in Austin right now. Look, I'm all in favor of parental choice. I'm all in favor of competition. Competition is good for the consumer. It forces the person producing the service to do better, but not at the risk of defunding our police, our schools. We can't be doing that. We have to make sure that we have the proper funding. My wife is a public school teacher, so I want to make sure we work towards that.
There are giant looming questions about Project Marble. The plan to create a new downtown entertainment district, which includes a new Spurs stadium. We know we don't have all the data, especially on how taxpayer dollars will be used. We also agree that we don't want to lose the Spurs. But people wonder, who is downtown for anymore? Is it for tourists? Is it for business? Or is it for locals? Please rank these three.
Business, tourists, and locals are on the same level for me. Okay, it's really important, to your point, that we do everything we can to fight to keep our Spurs and everything possible to also make sure that San Antonio gets a good deal. I've been very clear. I think we're actually premature in talking about some of the how much the city needs to pony up when there hasn't been nearly enough discussion of how the city is ultimately going to benefit. I've been very clear. We need answers to 3 questions. How much is it going to cost? Who's going to pay? And how is the city going to benefit? And then we can talk about who's the city's portion of that. My opponent, I know, feels differently about this. San Antonio Express News asked, and he said he thinks up to 50% of city funding should go toward paying for the new Spurs Arena. When we don't have all of this information, as you rightly point out, we haven't actually talked about the community benefit agreements yet. I think it's really premature.
Here's how I rank it: jobs, jobs, jobs. We have to make sure that we have jobs for our locals. This is a jobs creation program. This is an economic development program. It could be a game changer. And just like we invest taxpayer money in training our people, I think we should also invest taxpayer money in creating jobs, good paying jobs. Downtown is a great place for tourists, for locals, and for business. We have to make sure that we create an environment for all 3. You're right, I don't want to lose the Spurs. And they could go somewhere else, just like it happened in Seattle. They went to Oklahoma City. But that doesn't mean that our taxpayers are going to lose out. So we just have to understand what are the consequences of not investing in a Project Marble. Are we going to lose out on conventions? We are a tourist destination. We're a tourism city.
All right, welcome live from now the lobby of Steering Theater here at Trinity University. The debate is over, so what did you think at home?
We spent a whole lot of time in the theater itself asking our questions of the candidates. We hope that it really helped inform everybody who was watching. For people who tuned into this tonight undecided, people who maybe already made their decision, the effort was to get you the information to make that big choice on June 7th. And we covered a lot of ground in this debate.
Yeah, we did. And helping us cover a lot of ground was Professor Christine Drennan. I'm thinking she's going to join us here live. We're just grabbing people right and left. As you can see, a lot of people still out here, even the candidates still out here. Juan Sepulveda also going to join us now, one of the panelists. And I'm kind of, Juan, come in here. Christine, we'll start with you. Your thoughts about this debate?
My thoughts about this debate. I'm thrilled with this debate. I'm thrilled. There were a couple of questions that I thought were incredibly effective. My favorite, of course, was one of mine about like it's a best practices. It's a best practices question. What other city? Right. Let's look at another city. What are they doing well? What can we learn? So, and I loved that question. There were a couple where I thought that I wish we could have had a little bit more follow-up because they're deeply important, right? I'm still like the fact about who is downtown for. You know, we can say that it's for everybody, but if we go into the neighborhoods, that is not how people see it.
And you know, when we went over these questions, the four of us before this debate, we weren't sure they were going to answer the city that they emulate, the city that they look for, the city that they think San Antonio should be like. But they did. Yeah. Boston for Gina Ortiz Jones, Miami for Rolando Pablos. Your take, Juan, on this whole thing?
Yeah, so I think it's been interesting just to hear some folks who are kind of coming out with what they're saying. So it was a more civil debate than I think some of the more recent ones they've been having. This is tough for them as candidates, right? I think this is their 20th debate. Kevin can tell you, right? How tough it is to stay on message. We knew that there was still going to be a lot of talking points, but I think the questions brought out the contrast, right? And so for the folks who are watching, right, they're going to hear tonight's version and kind of be able to kind of see. Now, what's interesting is I think we had questions that were different from some of the other ones, right? And when you have two candidates who have not run for office, right, have not held city council or any elected experience, there's always the ability to talk about the future in a way that almost you can say anything. So I'm glad we were able to get them to talk about some real experiences. I think the question where they brought up Miami and Boston were good examples to push them a little bit, something they hadn't gotten from some other places. So I think that helped. But once again, that's part of what the campaign is. And I hope now, the big thing we keep saying about is we just hope folks are going to show up to vote, right? And so
we're going to get out there.
Yeah. I do think that the city question was perhaps the most specific we got tonight, given those examples of Miami and Boston. And you mentioned it, so often in campaigns, people talk about their vision for the future, their grand ideas, whether the office they're running for can actually implement that or not. But that one question we ask about a reality we know is coming, a $31 million deficit for that city. That's the one that I asked. I wasn't satisfied with the answer.
No.
There were not, even with the follow-up, there were not specifics on where are we going to cut. There was a lot of, we need to look at more information, we need to get an audit to see how we're spending money now. That's something that, like I said, we know is just around the corner, and I wish the candidates had drilled down on more tonight.
I feel like we covered a lot of topics too. A lot of the forums and the debates, they're like topic central: business, education, youth. We hopscotched around a lot. I think the $101 bill question was my biggest disappointment, that they did not say where they would put their money.
Can I follow that? Sure.
Yeah, I like the way that we had phrased that, because that question was about, and maybe it was tucked in a little bit too gently, but it was about goals. It was like, what are the goals of this city to you, right? And then does your budget match your goal? And maybe we should have pushed on it a little bit because maybe that would have, and maybe this is something for them to think about in the future, I hope, because I do think that the city, the vision of the city in the future for them differs. Right, and the budget then is your strategy to get to your goal. So that, just something that maybe like the next, I don't know who's the next debate, but we'll pass that to them.
Yeah, well, and we're less than a week away from early voting, which is June 27th, or May 27th, in case you didn't know. June 7th is Election Day. Do you think any minds were changed tonight?
Probably not, right? But I think, one thing we talked about is that the audience tonight, this is probably the one debate they saw. So I think for them, they're going to be able to see the clear contrast. You saw a more progressive version on one side, a more conservative version on the other side. So I think it's going to make it easier for them to kind of determine between the two. The challenge here is going to be if folks show up, right?
Can I say there was one surprise to me was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Rolando Pablos come out against vouchers tonight?
He did talk about, he referenced defunding public education. That was your question, I believe.
Yeah,
I think we saw somebody clearly try to move to the center.
He did a little bit, but I think
than he has.
and this is one of those things where it's about the language that's being said.
Yeah.
So when he started with the notion of competition is a good thing, that's the normal beginning notion of being in favor of.
Right.
It's interesting for, once again, our audience is seeing for the first time. The rest of us are professors. This is the 20th debate I'm watching, right? And so it's been interesting, though, Steve, to see him shift. So he wasn't early on talking about that second part. Oh, we're going to hurt the public schools. He was started with the choice is good, competition is good. He also added that individual piece now. My wife is a public teacher. I don't want her to have to go through this, right? To add a little personal touch. But I think you're right. There's a little bit of moving back to the center to kind of try to make some folks feel a little bit better about it, right?
Yeah. What I was happy with, you talk about did we change minds or did the candidates really change minds, right? The purpose of this was to reach our KSAT audience for people who have not been able to attend one of these, watch the other 19 that have happened. Not to toot our own horn, but I was proud we asked about neighborhood issues. Because when we talk about the budget, when we talk about Project Marvel, these are big, huge topics that don't affect somebody when they pull out of their driveway. But things like not having streets, not having drainage, or sidewalks rather, not having lighting, that does. That is something somebody deals with every single day. So while we may not have loved the answers, I'm glad that we had follow-up to those, and I'm glad that we asked, because that's what so many people I think will ultimately decide on.
Right. And that's that downtown question as well. It's like when I can't even get out of my house or into my car safely because there's a lot of dogs that are around the street, what are you doing with the land bridge, right? And so, again, questions I'm not answers I'm not sure, but at least it got brought up.
Yeah, the other thing that I would mention, I think something that we really wanted to have happen was we were helping the folks watching this debate learn about a little bit more about what a mayor really does, right? And so even if they didn't get the answers, or sometimes the questions were kind of sending. I heard folks coming out right now like, oh, I didn't know that. It's only one vote. So that part of the just helping folks understand, which didn't happen as much in some of the earlier debates, I think is a big plus.
Yeah. And nothing bonds you like coming up with questions for a debate. So I want to thank Christine. I want to thank Juan so much for your help. And of course, Trinity University for all, above and beyond. That's why I love partnering with Trinity and you guys and whoever started it. If it was Christine coming to you and you coming to me or however it started,
that is still part
that's
of
another
debate
that we're going to have later. I want to thank you guys for all of this.
Yes.
We're going to take a quick break. We're going to be right back with members of the power panel. Yes, they are in the room. They were in the room where it happened tonight. We're going to talk to them coming up.
Welcome back to our KSAT post-mayoral debate live stream. If you are a lover of our live streams, you probably recognize these guys. Kevin Wolf, former city councilman, former county commissioner, joining us now. DeMonte Alexander, thanks for being here. Local consultant. You guys have worked on so many campaigns in so many offices. We're glad you guys were here in the audience tonight. DeMonte, I'll start with you. What was your big takeaway for the evening?
The big takeaway, even for me, obviously there's some stark differences between the way they would tackle the budget, their view on Project Marvel. I think what really stood out to me was more of which I thought was a fairly easy question about the mayor's bully pulpit. In terms of, do we get involved with the national and the state level politics? And I just felt like that was an easy question in terms of, hey, you just stick to the mayor's responsibilities. And obviously, it's okay to speak out on things, but passing policy that impacts at a state level and things like that, I thought that was a question that kind of threw me off a little bit, that I thought they would be able to answer a little bit better, but yeah.
I want to know, I want your take on that too. Is there a question that stood out for you, Kevin?
So yeah, I'd have to turn to the same one DeMonte mentioned, and yeah, the easy answer that both candidates could have done, and I think should have done, is if it relates to the actual power of the city and the mayor, then yes, engage with state and federal. If not, stay the hell out.
Yeah. Is it who had more to gain or lose tonight?
Wow, you know, this is going to be one of the closest races ever. I think who had more to gain? I can't say, just because I think it's so close. I can tell you this: it was neck and neck until the very end.
On who you thought won this debate?
Yes, on who I thought won. Myra did such a great job of trying to get them to answer the question asked.
The homeless question, the budget question, all of the above?
Okay, you stayed on them, which is good, and they got better at it as they went along, but still both of them struggled with that. And you could see it kind of going back and forth, and I felt a little bit like a ping pong ball saying, okay, no, that was good, this is bad, that kind of thing.
Yeah. DeMonte, how about
So in my opinion, I feel like Gina had more to lose. Rolando had more to gain. I say that because of her demographics and the makeup of Bexar County, right?
Yes.
A lot of folks are thinking Gina's just going to coast through just because we saw the county judges race, right? That's typically how it plays out in Bexar County. So I think Gina's in a place where do no harm, right? But I think it's important for people to see if Rolando can move more to the center. Is he going to be that Governor Abbott's, puppet, as people say? Can he be that moderate Joe Strauss type of leader? And if Gina, we've heard things about Gina being a little strong when it comes to her opinions and things like that. Seeing a different side of Gina as well, she can be the stateswoman that people can think she could be. So all in all, I think she had a lot more to lose than Rolando. I think Rolando's trailing in this race, but I think Rolando needed this opportunity. I mean, I talked to someone on the side here who came here undecided, and this debate actually helped him make up his mind, which I thought was fascinating. As we know,
for which candidate? I'm curious.
Well, he said he moved to Gina's direction. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, was there a winner? I mean, Kevin said it was back and forth to the end. So I agree. I'm guessing he's decided who he thinks won. He didn't answer that question, so I want to know who you think won.
I agree with Kevin. I don't think there was a clear-cut debate winner tonight, because we didn't really get definite answers from the questions. We were looking for more specifics on these things, which I thought were pretty softball questions in my opinion. But I mean, it's different when you're on the stage and you get a question and you're answering. It's a lot different. So I don't think anyone.
You mean they weren't hard questions to answer, not that they were softball?
Well, yeah.
I don't want Myra to. You're standing really close to Myra, and Juan Sepulveda's over here.
Okay.
Christine Drennan.
I didn't mean that softball question. What I meant was.
Maybe you're not using the right words.
The questions I felt were somewhat easy to answer.
Okay, right? Thank you.
But again, that's different when you're in the hot seat and someone's throwing questions at you and you're trying to think about what to say, when not to say. So anyway, I don't think there's a clear-cut winner in the debate today.
Yeah. Kevin?
So first let me say this, and I was thinking about this while we were watching. Thanks to you and Myra and KSAT for doing this. This is a true public service.
Thank you.
Kevin.
It's news, it's stuff like that, but no, this is a true public service, and I just wanted to thank y'all for that. Yes, I do think Rolando brought it out in the end, primarily because of the very last piece where you let them each ask a question. And those They asked each other some tough questions, okay? And I think his answers were better than hers. I think that put him over the top in regards to the debate as a whole. I also agree with what you just said in that, who has more to lose, who has more to win. I agree based on exactly what you just said. And I want to mention something that I think I heard Juan say earlier, and that's when you're the candidate and you're up there, especially at this time of the race, you are dead tired, you are exhausted. It is nonstop, and you're squeezing every bit of energy out of yourself that you can. And to get up there and to be on point and to stay on message is one of the hardest things to do until you're the person actually doing it. It's hard to describe.
Because we heard some comments that really kind of move away from their platforms, right? Yep. We heard she talked about vouchers, right?
Yes.
We heard about Harburger Bridge.
Yes.
And all those different things. So we've heard them. A lot of things I heard, also heard some contradictory comments about equity and equality and things like that. You would mention equality on the business side and money sharing, but when it comes to neighborhoods, you talk about more of an equity conversation. So I think those need to be flushed out a little bit more than they are. Okay, where do we need equality? Where do we need equity in terms of, obviously San Antonio is one of the poorest, biggest cities in the country. Obviously we got to have an equity conversation, but where does that fit in? I do think there's a level from both of them, right? For example, when you ask someone, okay, where are you going to spend this money? Well, let's take a look at what we're spending right now. And you look at your family budget, right? Well, we have $62 left to spend. Where are we going to spend it? Well, can you cut back on your subscription? So I appreciate, let's take a step back, look at the data, see what we don't need, and then see what we have, and then spend that way. But I also like the approach of, I like, some people like folks, it was a good question, but I also, sometimes people just want you to make a decision and have a plan, right? And that's very important as well.
Yes.
Do you think there were, kind of in that vein, were there any missteps?
Well, yeah, I'd say that was a big misstep. When you did what do you do with the 26%? Okay. I know immediately in both of our heads, I started listing off things. Okay, I don't think we need to do this, I don't think we need to do that. That's what people want to hear. They want to hear what DeMonte said. They want a plan, okay? And they had a big miss in that neither one was really good at answering that question. They did what I call the political answer. They say a lot of words and it sounds kind of good, but it doesn't really mean anything.
Well, Gina was specific. She did point out specific, the airport, the Frankfurt, Germany flight.
On what she cut back, right?
What she'd cut back and things like, and I'm sure there's plenty of other things that they can look at. Again, but I'm trying to give them grace. A mayor is a big job. It's a hard job. I don't think anybody.
Well, and we specifically asked that
bike
question.
Lanes too.
Yeah, and bike lanes is what Rolando said. But we specifically asked that question because these are two people who have never served in city government.
Yeah. But
this is the budget. This is what you have.
Right.
What do you do with it?
Right.
I was disappointed they didn't really formulate great answers on what they would do with it.
I think this stage in the election, there should be at least some type of idea.
Yes.
You've been through several debates. You've had these conversations. You look down. You've been with your team. You should have kind of had this somewhat flushed out. Maybe not all the way, but I think the conversation and what the elephant in the room is Project Marvel, really.
Yeah.
Because whether you do, there's an opportunity cost if you don't, right? And if you do, then what does that look like? Who does it benefit? Does it benefit San Antonio? We have arenas right now that some of them are empty or half empty.
Yep.
Have they generated economic development? So there's a lot of questions. So I appreciate Gina kind of stepping back and saying, hey, well, let's look and see what we have. Does arenas really generate economic? Maybe it's a KSAT explained. So do arenas really generate revenue? Right?
And you're batting 1,000 with Myra tonight. You know that? No wonder you decided to stand by Myra. I get it now.
And if you've been to other cities, you see the growth and development.
Yes.
I mean, just going to Dallas alone, staying 5 minutes from the arena, there's bars, there's restaurants, and you can see the activity.
Yes.
You can see what they do, but how does that fit in San Antonio, and what does that look like?
One of the questions that we devised that I was a little surprised that they answered as clearly as they did is, give us a city that you think San Antonio should emulate. Rolando said Miami, and Gina said Boston. That surprised you that they came up with those answers that quickly, and that those were the cities they pointed to?
As a communications professional and being in a hot seat, it's tough to answer that question, but I would say there's no city like San Antonio.
Correct, and that was the premise to start.
There's no city like San Antonio for these reasons. We have one of the largest MLK marches in the country.
Yep.
No one does fiesta like we do. Our culture is different, so let's stop, for me, let's start focusing on building on what San Antonio is and less like what other cities are doing, right? Now, obviously, there's some things you want to take away from what other cities are doing. I know we compare to Seattle, we compare to Arizona, similar cities, our size, population, those types of things. But at the end of the day, those cities are not San Antonio. And we have a history and data and historical and tribal knowledge of how we got to where we are today. I mean, Dr. Drennan was here today, right?
Right.
To help us understand what we need to do in the future.
I do think, though, they did kind of answer that with what they want to take from those cities. From Boston, it was the higher education. And from Miami, it was the center of Latin America. We can be that for Mexico. I did think that they told us the cities and they gave us the examples.
Yeah, and I was actually surprised as you were to come up with a city off the top of your head like that, and then have a reasonable explanation as to why you picked that city. That was tough, and I think they both did fairly well on that. They pulled out points because look, we don't really want to be, and we're never going to be, and I don't want to be like City X. Right. But do I want to benchmark and take things from different cities? Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, I appreciate you guys.
Yes, thank you all so much for being here.
I know you both have been hustling to get here tonight, and just the fact you both made it on time, especially DeMonte, I appreciate that. You know I love you, man. I love you. You know I love you. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we are back live at Trinity University with our debate post show here on KSAT Plus. Myra Arthur with me, and we have 3 veterans with us as well. Thank you for your service, first of all. Want you to introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Carlos Antonio Raymond, and I served during the Vietnam War, one of the most darkest hours in American history. And I'm proud to live here in San Antonio, Texas, military city San Antonio.
Thank you, Carlos.
Pedro Bernal, U.S. Army.
Richard Costa, Air Force, Iraq War.
So I want to start, first of all, it was a thrill to have you guys in the audience. I want to, we didn't ask one specific veteran question, but veterans, Military City USA came up again and again and again. What is your take from tonight's debate? I'll start with you, Richard.
Well, the one thing that we saw with the why we're at this current runoff is that a lot of the city council members didn't get voted in as part of even the top 3, right? And yes, I think a lot of it has to do because of the city staff and leading the charge when it comes to what the council members do and everything. And I think that's why a lot of people looked for an outside person to be the official. But the thing that I did not like that from both candidates is that, yes, we do want somebody from the outside, but that doesn't mean you don't look at the past reports, the housing reports, the economic reports that we have out there. I don't want our next mayor to have to learn from day one. You know, yes, they're going to have to sit down and listen to what the city staff tells them, but we don't want all their news just to come from city staff.
Did you have your mind made up before you came in here who you were going to vote for?
Well, not really. I still want to look at both situations because I see that like Ron Pablos is looking at how can I bring in more income into the city and everything. We need more tax revenue as the city grows and everything. But I also, when it comes to the American GI Forum in Bexar County, we've been pushing a policy to end source of income discrimination against veterans with housing vouchers. And I don't see him really pushing towards homeless and housing and everything. I really want our veterans to be able to choose where to live and not have to just rely on the low-income areas.
Yeah, so you're still undecided?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Your take on tonight?
My take on tonight is that I saw both come together and try to dance around a little bit. There was a lot of dancing, and I could put two together. There's a lot of dancing, but when you have to come down to it for a vet to be able to vote either one, and right now I'm undecided still, it being able to put my support behind anybody, you have to say, what are you really going to do for the vets? Who's really going to advocate for the vets? And I didn't see that take on it for us, especially with the policy in place. There's stuff out there about our policy, and then there's stuff that can hinder us, like you all were talking about, that homelessness and that shelter. None of them really answered that fact of the question, well, what's making that person not want to go to that shelter? Well, maybe it's because it's the poor side of a neighborhood. You got to look at that. If it's poor, I wouldn't want to go back to a poor side neighborhood and go to a shelter there. If we were able to be around the people that are prospering, being able to be one of them, and be where the shelter is, probably on the north side, then be accepting to all the people of San Antonio, not just the inclusion. That's where I want to see one mayor getting all the people together.
Are you still undecided?
I'm throwing my support one way, and I really don't want to say it because that's my opinion.
That's fine. And I'm not asking you to. I just was more curious if you'd made up your mind.
He's trying to come around because he's trying to see who's going to really support the vets.
Yeah. Carlos, I want to let you have your say here. What did you think about the debate tonight, and did you hear your take on the debate, first of all?
My take on the debate, I came here to hear what the candidates, how they're going to address the homeless encampment. I live on the far west of San Antonio City Council, District Number 6. District Number 6, one of the highest numbers of veterans live in District 6. And a lot of veterans are calling and asking me, well, what are they going to do for veterans? What are they going to do to help the homeless encampment? We have a lot of homeless encampment here, and I wanted to hear what they're going to do. How are we going to clean up the city and help some of these veterans? We have veterans coming from all over the country looking for jobs and medical care. And what the Department of Veterans Administration is saying, we don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough attendants to take care of all these veterans. And that hurts me because now they have to take to the streets. And I want to know what either of these candidates are going to do. I have a good idea who that person is. And I believe that person can do a good job to help our veterans here in San Antonio.
Do you want to share? Do you want to share who you've decided you're going to vote for?
No.
Keep it to yourself. I'm fine with that. I don't need to know.
Okay, all right. But I have a pretty good idea. We want somebody who's going to reach out and bring city council to the veterans, go into the community where they are suffering, and help those veterans. I'm a part of the community, been here for what, 30 years. I was just telling somebody here, I go on the hills. I have a truck, and sometimes the VA needs a designated driver to go pick up these veterans, take them to the hospital, wait for them, and take them back home. I'm just one person, and my heart is for the veterans because that's who I care for a lot. And the last mayor, they hardly went out in the community and to service these veterans, and they're lost, they're hurt.
That's what we hoped. The goal of tonight was to give people a pretty good idea, like yourself, if you came into this undecided, give you information that helps you make that decision on June 7th.
I thank a lot for doing that. I have a strong idea now who that mayor is going to leave. It's going to be. So now I can go back to the community and just tell them where their vote should go.
Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate you being in the audience. And again, to echo Steve, thanks for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Pleasure.
Nice to meet you, Rich.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Appreciate your time. Thank you for coming out. Yeah.
You didn't seem nervous at all.
You did great.
You did great.
First, and we also want to thank, of course, everybody at home who watched the debate, watched the post-debate show here on KSAT Plus. The most important thing you can do in all of this is vote. If you didn't vote in the general election, you can still vote in
the runoff if you're registered. Early voting starts on May 27th. Election Day is June 7th.
Thank you so much for joining us for this debate, for our live stream here. We have so many election resources on our website right now under the Vote 2025 section. If you want to check out a sample ballot, anything like that, go check it out. Make your decision, get out there and make a vote.
Good night.